India and Pakistan appear to be de-escalating. A time to step back and take a look at India-Pakistan relations and India-China relations. And I have with me Gautam Bambawale. Many of you will remember him as India's former High Commissioner to Pakistan, and until recently, until November last year, he was ambassador in China also. What's your sense of where India and Pakistan are going after this, the last 3 days of high-profile action?
You know, I think we have to keep in mind the fact that the terrorist strike in Pulwama was something that India had to act against, and we did. The fact of the matter is that India is against the terrorism which has been aided and abetted by Pakistan and which is directed at us. It has been going on for almost 40 years now, and we had to show that we will not stand for this anymore. And I think the surgical strike of 2016 and the air strikes of 2019 are a clear indication of India's resolve to tackle this menace.
How do you think Pakistan is going to react from now on? I mean, there's a sense of uncertainty now, would you say?
I would say that, you know, the entire paradigm of this issue has changed with the actions that we took, not only in 2019, but also the surgical strike of 2016. So we have indicated that we are willing to go into Pakistan and take out the terrorists there. I think also what is very important is that this particular airstrike was undertaken after credible intelligence reports and evidence was available with us that there were terrorists at Balakot, and we decided to take them out. It is also very important that we didn't have any civilian casualties there, and we didn't target any military installations. So this was a purely counter-terrorist kind of operation and didn't have any further, it was a non-military kind of operation.
But how do you expect the Pakistanis to react to this? I would presume that now there's a sense of uncertainty on their side because of how we could react in future?
Absolutely, absolutely. You're 100% correct. Using terrorism as a proxy has going to be changed and is changing.
What has the army been shown not to be incompetent? Are they going to, how does it deal with this internally, domestically?
No, I would say that, you know, the airstrikes have to a certain extent taken Pakistan by surprise. I don't think they were expecting such a operation, this kind of reaction from India, and it has now created a new paradigm in this whole issue. Whether the army is, we will have to wait and see how exactly the Pak army responds to this, because as we all know, as far as policy towards India is concerned, it is mainly directed by the army and the military authorities in Pakistan. But I do hope that better sense prevails. The fact that they're handing back wing commander is a very good move, a good step. We are happy with that. But the core question of Pakistan giving up its terror proxies is still around, and we need to address that. Both countries, India and Pakistan, need to address that.
Do you see the Pakistanis pulling back their terror proxies? Do you see any indication now that the Pakistanis will think twice before launching terror strikes on us?
Surya, in some quarters in India, there is a feeling that one surgical strike or one air strike will end terrorism aimed at us. That is obviously, in reality, that's not going to happen. But what we have indicated is that the costs of undertaking such kind of proxy terrorism has risen and is now at a totally different level, a different plane. So this will have to be factored in. As I said earlier, I do not think that this is going to end the proxy terrorism and the proxy war which Pakistan is waging against us, but we have shown our resolve that we will take the battle into Pakistan if that is required.
Looking at how the Chinese reacted, what is your sense of how they have dealt with this?
Look, what I think is that the Chinese have been quite balanced on this matter, because where terrorism is concerned, they are against terrorism in all its forms and manifestations. China also faces terrorism in its western province of Xinjiang, and it's a big headache for them. So they have to balance off the fact that they have a strategic relationship with Pakistan. They don't want to put the finger on Pakistan where this matter is concerned, but at the same time they cannot go back on their stated policy of being against terrorism in all its forms and manifestations. So I think what has come out of the recent meeting at Wuchan, where our External Affairs Minister, Madam Sushma Swaraj ji, had been there, is a statement from China which is pretty good for us.
Do you see the Chinese perhaps cautioning the Pakis on terrorism, on trying to hold them back in some way?
If you look at the reaction of all other nations, especially all other major nations, to our airstrike, there is a large amount of support in the international community for the action that India has taken. And all of the other major countries have been advising Pakistan that they should wind down these terror operations which are aimed at India. I think the Chinese have also seen this shift in the wind, and they are also adjusting to that. So there has been some adjustment in their position on this front, as I said earlier.
Do you expect an adjustment on the one issue that is important for us, the designating of Maulana Masood Azhar?
I can tell you my own view on this, Surya, and that is that I think we need to be transactional with the Chinese on the question of the listing of Masood Azhar under the 1267 sanctions of the United Nations. And when I say we have to be transactional, what I mean is that we should look for a possible deal that India can make with China for the listing of Masood Azhar to go ahead, for China to approve the listing of Masood Azhar. And I just want to hark back a little bit to last year, when the grey listing of Pakistan in the Financial Action Task Force or FATF happened. We were able to do a deal with the Chinese, and therefore they permitted the grey listing to go ahead. So I think what is important is that China is looking after its own interests, and a deal of this kind is possible. But what would be a possible deal is something that I can't answer because I'm not in government. People are diplomats, I'm sure, are working on this.
But if you were to say, if you want to look at, say, the kind of options that we have in doing some kind of a deal with the Chinese on this, what could the possible options be? I mean,
the possible options are, if that the Chinese need our support on a particular thing in the United Nations, then we should do a deal with them, that you side with us on Masood Azhar and we will side with you on some other important aspect of the United Nations work which they are wanting.
But you don't see any shift in the strategic relationship between these two countries?
No, I don't think there's a change in the strategic relationship between Pakistan and China. I think that is very much there and continues.
So that they will remain iron brothers, and that all that flows from that, the defense part of it.
I don't think that is going to change just because of one airstrike against Balakot and against a terrorist base in Balakot.
In your discussions with the Chinese, I want to go back to an earlier period, Doklam. You weren't there then, but what is the impression conveyed by other diplomats, or even perhaps by the Chinese, to you about how we behaved in Doklam? Was it unexpected? Was it a shock?
I think what the Indian Army did at Doklam did come as a shock to the Chinese, and they reacted to that. In fact, I would go so far as to say that their diplomatic reactions were completely unexpected, because they boxed themselves into a corner, and I wouldn't have expected that from Chinese diplomacy. About other people who were based in Beijing at that time, especially those who are neither from India nor China, I think they felt that India had sort of stared the Chinese down.
Stare the Chinese down. Would you think they would have been surprised by the action we took in Balakot?
I think so. I think both China and Pakistan would have been taken aback by that.
And the impression we have here in India is that the gloves are coming off vis-a-vis Pakistan. Do you expect the Chinese to intercede more forcibly on behalf of their client state in a sense? In the event there is another kind of action that India takes?
No, I can't see the Chinese intervening, especially when there is a action and reaction process, as we just saw. So there was an action which was the terrorist attack in Pulwama in Jammu and Kashmir, and there was a reaction from the Indian side. And I think the entire international community, and I think China is a part of this, felt that India had the right to protect herself, because we had credible intelligence that there were more terrorist attacks being planned by the Jaish-e-Mohammed, and that they were gathered at least in some strength in Balakot. So India had the right to protect her own citizens, her own citizenry, And I think the international community feels that that is something which is a right that India does have to self-defense.
Okay, let's move away from this China, Pakistan, India thing, and let's look at the BRI. There's going to be a major summit again, I think sometime in April. What's your sense of BRI and where it's going?
Look, the Chinese have put a lot of money into these projects which comprise the BRI, and not just in our part of the world, but all over the world. And I think, they have to be sure that there is a return on these projects that they're doing. And that, unfortunately, is still a question mark, because many of these projects, they are not, they're far too opaque, they're not transparent enough for people who are not part of those projects to make a decision on whether these projects are going to be viable, whether they are going to yield an economic return. So if you're just going to pour money into projects which are not viable and do not yield a return, then obviously you cannot go on longer with that kind of activity. So the jury is still out, we have to wait and see. I don't think India will be changing its position on BRI anytime soon.
But there is a broad pushback. I think more than 20 countries now are opposing BRI, saying it's not too great and all that.
Absolutely. When I was ambassador to China, I was often asked the question, why is it that India supports and is a member of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, and at the same time it opposes the BRI? And my answer used to be that, look, there are certain standards which a multilateral development bank and projects like the BRI have to come up to. And those standards are, 1, the projects have to be viable. 2, the projects should not violate the sovereignty of any country. 3, the projects have to be transparent and open. And all the projects being done by the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank do meet these criteria and these standards, whereas the BRI projects do not meet these standards. So we support AIIB, we're one of the largest lenders from the AIIB, but we oppose the BRI.
And where do you see CPEC going?
Well, CPEC actually consists of 2 separate parts. One is the transport corridor, and that is almost done. Gwadar port, of course, has to be still constructed and has to move on in construction. That is a longer term project. But the transportation corridor, the road linking China with Pakistan all the way down to Gwadar, is almost ready. But the important part of an economic corridor is to have economic zones or industrial zones on either side of the transport corridor. Now that is going to be much more difficult. There are Chinese companies who say that they will invest in these industrial zones, but the investment climate in Pakistan is not very good, and for very good reasons. There is no security in that country. So the big challenge is going to be to convert the transport corridor into an economic corridor through investment by private sector and public sector companies. And I think that is going to be a big challenge.
There are some reports that the Chinese may dilute some of the things about BRI in order to get perhaps India on board. Do you see any signs of this happening?
I don't see any major signs of any changes in the standards part, which I discussed earlier with you, Surya. So I don't see major changes taking place there. And as you rightly said, there are other countries which now see the point that India had made as far back as 2017, April and May. And at that time, we had brought to the fore all our concerns about the BRI. And today, many other countries are on board with those concerns, see the same viewpoint that we had articulated as far back as May 2017.
Let's look at the Quad and the way it's shaping up. China's concerns about the Quad, are they in a sense kind of putting a little pressure on India to kind of keep a distance from the Quad?
Look, the Chinese don't like the Quad at all. There's no doubt about that. And the reason for that is very simple, because they feel that the Quad is something which is being engineered by the United States as a method or way to contain China. And that they don't like at all. But the explanation given by Prime Minister Modi at his speech in Singapore last year, that it is not an exclusive concept, it is an open concept We can have more countries being part of the open, free and open Indo-Pacific. I think that has assured the Chinese. And in any case, we are not trying to contain China, because I think China is too big to be contained, and India too cannot be contained. But I think the Chinese do watch this very carefully. Let me also say one little word, because there's a lot of misunderstanding in India about the Wuhan summit. And people feel that due to the Wuhan summit, India's ability to work with other countries across the globe, whether it's Russia or the United States or the Europe or Japan, has reduced. My answer would be it's exactly the opposite. Our ability to do things with Japan, US, Australia, Russia also, has actually increased because of the understandings which came out from the Wuhan summit.
Tell me, the Wuhan summit never saw any declaration or anything. Okay, it was an informal summit.
Yeah.
But people would like to know exactly what they discussed and what are the outcomes.
Look, let me put it this way, that the basic reason that we did an informal summit is that it enabled just the two leaders, the Prime Minister of India, who's the leader of India, and the President of China, who is the leader of China, to spend as much time as possible, and in this case they spoke for almost 8 to 10 hours, to talk to each other so that they have a better understanding of each other's countries, of each other's interests, of each other's calculations. And I think that was the major result and outcome of the Wuhan summit, that both President Xi Jinping of China and Prime Minister Modi got a good measure of what the other leader was thinking, his calculations, his assessments, and I think that was a very important thing. The Chinese call this strategic communication. So I think the Wuhan summit was strategic communication at its very best, and therefore both India and China have agreed that there will be more informal summits of this kind, and I definitely hope that President Xi Jinping will be able to visit India for the next informal summit, maybe later this year after our electoral process is over.
Do you expect the Wuhan summit to trickle down the line, so they moderate their behavior perhaps on the disputed border and other
I think it will have a positive impact, because what has happened is that the Wuhan summit has changed the calculations of each government, has changed the atmospherics of the relationship as a whole, especially post-Doklam. And I think this itself has had a positive impact on the rest of the India-China relationship. We've seen so many things happen last year, including meetings between the defense ministers, between the foreign ministers, between the army commanders of the two sides. And I think it's always better in diplomacy and in relationship between countries to be talking rather than not talking.
Yes.
So I think it will have a positive impact.
But no early resolution of the border, you don't see?
I don't see early resolution of the border because of the complexities of the border. You must keep in mind that this is a border which is at heights of 12 to 16,000 feet in the mighty Himalayas. So we must be patient with our negotiators. We must give them time. I don't see an early resolution of this question.
So all these rounds of talks that these special representatives have had, what has it done? What has it achieved?
Well, I think these rounds of talks have made both sides spell out some of their what are their ideas, what are their concerns, what exactly they want out of a border resolution, so that there has been forward movement. I won't say there has been no forward movement. There is a better understanding of what the other side is looking for from a boundary resolution. So let's see how much more time it takes. But I think both India and China are, they are old civilizations, they are ancient civilizations. They have the patience to work on this. And in the meantime, of course, we agreed that we will try to maintain the peace and tranquility in the India-China border areas. And that has very broadly, it has held because of the agreements that we have achieved and the standard operating procedures we have put in place on the border.
But that hasn't lessened the incursions and the transgressions.
It hasn't lessened the incursions and the transgressions. Those happen.
In fact, the Chinese would see us as their main challenge in Asia.
Well, there is Japan. Japan is a very important player in Asia. I don't know if they see us as the number one challenge or Japan as the number one challenge, or the US is also in Asia. They have not withdrawn as yet as their number one challenge. But I think from a strategic perspective, they do realize that India is a growing power and that we are right next to China. So they do factor that in.
And you don't see any signs of them lessening their relationship with Pakistan?
No, I don't see that happening immediately, but you have to factor in that the strategic partnership or the strategic relationship between China and Pakistan works for both those countries. It works for Pakistan and it works for China.
Yeah.
So you have to factor that in. That's a reality, and that's something we will have to live with.
Summing up, how would you look at our relations with Pakistan and with China?
Well, with China, I would say that it's a forward-looking relationship. There is a future, and most importantly, we are able to talk to China on difficult issues, on easier issues, on all issues across the board. We're able to talk to them logically and move forward on our subjects and issues. Unfortunately, with Pakistan, what has happened is that there is a lot of raw emotion. And this raw emotion between the people and the governments of the two countries came from the bloody partition of India. And one can understand that. But I think the day we can start talking to each other logically and rationally will be the day when we'll be able to resolve issues between India and Pakistan, and the two countries can then get on with their own lives and move ahead.
Ambassador, thank you very much for that conversation and for that insight.
Thank you so much.